Hello, everyone. Welcome back to everyone who joined us last Wednesday for part one of this training workshop on gender equality and global capital markets. Hopefully, you were all able to join us for the previous session, but if you did miss part one, we will have a short recap today, but do highly recommend you watch the video, which we already have posted on YouTube and we've put it on our webpage. So we'll share with you how to access that video. Now, in the interest of time, we'd like to get kicked off. I see people are still joining, but I think let's dive into it. And first of all, thanks to our hosts. So Euronext hosted us today. We have a combination of Euronext staff and Euronext market participants in our audience today. And we are also learning a lot from Euronext. They've played a very active role in the development of this training program. And I'm very happy that we have today to kick off part two, Cleo Cordeville, who is head of diversity and inclusion at Euronext. And I'd love to pass over to you, Cleo, to kick us off.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this second part of our training. So hosted in partnership with UNSSE and UN Women program. We have some fantastic guest speakers lined up today, and I'm super excited to kick off this second part of training with you. I'll be quick, don't worry. Last week, the speakers focused a lot on building a concrete understanding of the purpose of gender equality, examining the landscape, the why, explaining how committing with signing the Women Empowerment Principles, for instance, was key. Today, we'll move forward by focusing on implementation and communication. At Euronext, we recognize that diversity and inclusion are not just ethical imperatives, they are powerful drivers for us for innovation, performance, and success. We are proud because we have really improved since our annual Ring the Bell ceremonies that we are doing now on an annual basis. Since March 23, we have decided to formally sign the Women Empowerment Principle. It was a key momentum for us because this formal commitment highlighted our dedication to gender equality. We have a long history in supporting gender equality. We had seen them improved on some set of actions. For instance, as a market infrastructure, we face really a unique challenge in operating in industries that are really traditionally dominated by men, both in IT and in finance. So, of course, it's important for us to continue this action. For instance, we have built local D&I communities, and we have talked last session on the importance of this network. So in each of our locations, we have women initiative programs that are raised to increase awareness, to increase leadership, training, networking. And of course, it's in parallel with all other D&I network around all forms of diversity. We want to go a step further. That's interesting to talk today about communication. It's also about communicating inside the company. We are about to launch a D&I online community with a specific work group for women because we want all the offices to connect better, to foster this collaboration better, and to better engage employees about what's happening in the various locations. Of course, we have made progress around leadership, gender representation at the group level. We have some targets, and same we have discussed last week, the power of target, with 30% of managing board represented with female, 40% of the supervisory board, but also 34% of senior leadership. It's important to really maintain this target and maintain a continuous effort. And this is why we really want to ensure that we attract and enrich the talent pipelines with talented women on a regular basis. So we have partnership with schools, partnership with recruiter agency to ensure that we really address the gender imbalances risk in, as I said, in IT or in finance. We are also part of many networks like Women in Trading, Women in ETF, Women in IT, because we really believe the power of communities. Again, we really leverage on Euronext federal model. This is why we have some specificities by location. In France, as a listed company, we are part of the index SBF 120. I'm pretty sure our speaker, Niti, will speak about it. We were invited by the French Ministry of Gender Equality to report on our progress toward the feminization of governing bodies. This is key because it's really the accountability to report, to disclose, to be public, aligned with the French regulation on board gender quotas. It's also being transparent as part of the Equilip indices, and the same Nitarshini Tevatas will explain the impact about this publicity through indices, because it's super important to really highlight this achievement of this concrete action. Of course, gender equality is everywhere in our everyday practices. We dedicate a lot of part about it in all our HR processes, ensuring equal opportunities for everyone, ensuring to work to close the gender pay gap. And again, the new regulation will help us to be more and more transparent about this type of activities, and having the view of our colleagues, Judith Stein from the investor relation team, will be key for you to understand how the external community understand the effort we are doing inside each company. I want just you to remember all that gender equality is not just a target, it's a shared responsibility. It's an ongoing process. This training is a key step for us in this journey. We're happy to have Euronext colleague and market participants. So let's have this new phase of training today. I give you the floor, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Cleo, and congratulations for all the effort that Euronext is doing. We're very happy to see that Euronext Paris in particular is often the #1 of our, well, it has been #1 actually since we started ranking stock exchanges for their gender equality and leadership level. So already great progress. Let's continue to work together on expanding that. Great. So with that, I'm just going to quickly introduce you to a few things we discussed last time for those of you who missed it, or a reminder for those of you who were here with us. First of all, today is part 2. Cleo gave a really good overview of what we learned last time and what we're going to learn today. So I'll move on to the housekeeping. Now, as a reminder, you are all muted, so we cannot hear from you, from your voices, but please do consider this an open dialogue throughout the session. So anytime you have a question, do not hesitate to ask it. We are here to discuss these questions with you, to dive into them. Anything that's perplexing you, let's go ahead and jump into that. So if you have any questions, put that in the Q&A. Also, feel free to share your comments. You can introduce yourself into the chat box. You can also share any comments or concerns you might have in the chat box. Just to note that because we do have over 100 participants, any questions you put in the chat box might get lost. So we do ask you to put those questions in the Q&A box so we can keep track of them. As with last time, we're together today for 2 hours. Looking forward to hearing from you all in those 2 hours, so you're not just listening to us. But we do hope you participate, and we expect that participation, and we will reward you for it. So at the end of today's session, we will share with you how to get a certificate for the 2 parts of this training. We just ask that you fill in a quick feedback survey at the end. Should take you no more than 10 minutes, and then within 5 working days, you'll get a certificate of participation. Now, for a reminder of our facilitators and the new facilitators we have today, back with you from last time is myself, Tiffany Grabsky. I'm the head of the SSE Academy, and I'm very pleased to be joined today again with Landon Wilcock, who's our project officer. We'll both be facilitating the training from the SSE's perspective today. And we are joined once again with Anna Felth, who's head of Women Empowerment Principal Secretariat. Anna gave us a really good overview of the WEPs last time, but she's going to dig a bit deeper into that and some of the tools that WEPs has available for you as you continue in your journey today. Now, we also have 2 great speakers from Euronext, as Cleo has mentioned, and she'd mentioned already about the indices. And so Nitarshini is going to be with us today. Well, she's with us already, and she's going to be talking to us today about the Euronext indices. She is a senior index business developer, and she has a great presentation planned for everyone today. We're also very pleased to be joined today with Judith Stein, who's Investor Relations Manager, who's going to speak to us at the end after our communication discussion, and really look at it from that investor relations perspective and talk about the communication side a bit. So really looking forward to those 2 speakers. Thanks so much, Judith and Nita, for joining us today. Now, we're going to continue on this journey we started last week on addressing complexities. But if you remember from last week, we broke that down a bit, so it didn't seem too overwhelming. Now, we did cover the first two sections of this last time. So we covered prepare and align in part one. So now we're on to implement and communicate. So we're going to kick off today's session with implementation. So that's really how you can capture value through gender lens market promotion and products. And what we're really looking at here is how gender lens and gender equality is being integrated into financial markets and capital markets. And then finally, communication. Obviously, you can only invest in products if you actually know anything about them. So we're going to talk about how that communication happens, not just externally, but also internally, and the importance of internal communication of your efforts as well. For both of those, we're going to give you a few tools on how to get started. And our objective today, again, we have two main objectives, is first and foremost to help you to understand how you can capture market value for gender equality performance. We talked a lot about last time about why and how to get started. But now let's look at making sure you're getting out of that what you hoped. And then our second objective is to help you to identify those communication channels that can be used for gender-related information, and again, why we should be communicating that information. To achieve those main objectives, we have a quick look at the agenda here. So first and foremost, we're going to do a quick recap. We want to make sure that everybody who wasn't here yesterday at least gets the basic concepts that we talked about, not yesterday, sorry, on Wednesday last week. But then also just to review it for those of you who were with us today or on Wednesday. And then we're going to go into that implement section, assessing gender lens finance. We'll have a quick break again, just 5 minutes like last time, and then we'll dive into communication. And we will wrap up with additional resources, which are all in your slide deck. So if you want to already, if you haven't already, download that slide deck off our website, you can access that at any point. Now with that, let's start the communication a little bit here. As with last time, we're going to be using Mentimeter. Not as many times this time, we'll just use it a couple times, but we do want to, oops, sorry, I need to stop sharing this one now. It's funny how sometimes Zoom can work differently from one day to the next. But here we go. We're just using Mentimeter now to start to hear from you a little bit. We'll use it just a couple times today, but it helps us also gauge from you where you're at on these particular objectives, which can help us to gauge a little bit how we need to adjust our training today. So as with last time, we want to just start off with a couple questions about what your current comfort level is on these topics. So to access this, you can use that QR code on the bottom left side. You can also use the link that Landon will share in the chat. And you can just go to www.menti.com and type in that code 74443170. It looks like a few of you have managed to access it already. It's good to see that actually comfort levels are, I've never seen it so bumpy actually. It's all over the road. So it looks like we have a really broad audience here, but we wanted to understand how comfortable you are with identifying that gender equality can add to investment strategies. How comfortable are you in communicating gender-related information to investors? And this final one, in explaining to colleagues the financial value of gender equality. And we'll give you just a few more seconds there to fill that in. If you are having any trouble accessing the Menti, let us know, because we'll use it a couple more times today. And after this, we're going to do a really quick quiz on Menti. So it'd be great to get as many of you on there as possible. Great. So it's actually evened out a little bit there. It looks like the comfort level is pretty much along the whole board for discussing financial value of gender equality. Now, some of you will probably remember what we discussed last time about the value of gender equality. So we'll do a bit of a refresher on that today. And then communicating gender-related information to investors can be very complex. And I see some of you are very uncomfortable with that. Most of you in the middle. And some of you are very comfortable with it. So maybe those of you who are very comfortable will even want to share a bit of your experience in the training today. And then the first one, it looks like we're a little bit more comfortable with identifying that value that gender equality can add. Hopefully, some of that came from our training last week as well. Great. So since we have a good portion of you on already, I'm going to go to the next one. We're going to see how many of you pop into this little game here. I think each one of those little characters represents one of you. I'm not sure if you know which character is actually you or not, but we have just over 60. I'll give it a few more seconds here. And then we're going to ask you, it's a quick quiz question. I'll give you 5 more seconds for anyone else who wants to join. 2 seconds. Okay, I'm going to start the quiz. Oh, maybe I went too quickly. Okay, there we go. It should be asking you the question right away. Is the objective? Remember, we had 3 circles together. What was the end objective we wanted to achieve? Was it equity or equality? And remember, one of them was a means of achieving the other one. And let's see who can remember. You have 10 seconds left. 5 seconds. I think all of you have submitted. Great. So well done, those of you who guessed equality. Now, don't worry if you got this wrong. They're just terms in the end. But we'll recap this momentarily just to remind us all why we have 2 very similar terms, but understanding that one of them is used to achieve the other. And to achieve equality, we really need diversity, equity, and inclusion all working together. So I'm going to end that Menti there and come back to our slide deck. Great. So hopefully you can all see the slide deck now. If you have trouble seeing anything, just let us know. We can help you in the chat. So this was the three diagram, or the 3 circle diagram I was talking about. So we discussed this a little bit last time. Landon took us through this. Now, if you remember that we were saying then that equality was really the objective, but in order to achieve it, we needed to have diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we were talking about diversity kind of as the board seat or the seat at a boardroom. Remember, we have to go beyond the boardroom, but just to give it an analogy here. So diversity is really ensuring that multiple identities are being represented. And this can include sex, gender, culture, race, ethnicity, religion, age, disability, etc. So diversity we were talking about is like having a seat at the boardroom, being able to sit down in that room. Then we have equity. Now, it sounds a lot like equality, but when we're talking about equity in our training today, this is about recognizing and reorganizing power distribution. So we talked about equity in our last session about being able to speak or having a microphone so that everybody can hear you at the same kind of volume. So this means that nobody's speaking louder than somebody else or is heard more than somebody else, that we all are kind of equally heard at the table. And remember that it's not enough just to have, men and women at the table or different races or ethnicities at the table, but they all have to feel comfortable with speaking and have the ability to speak up at that table. And remember, if we only have equity and diversity there, we might have cultural assimilation, as you can see at the bottom of that slide there. Now, the third bubble we had is inclusion. So that's really, we need all 3. So we can't have just the 2 without inclusion, but that's ensuring that every individual feels welcome, that they're given equal opportunity to connect, belong, and grow, and to contribute to the organization, to advance their careers and feel comfortable and confident being their authentic self. So remember, we might have people, for example, we might have a bunch of women join a boardroom, but they feel like they have to act like a man. So they might take on different characteristics or reflect only parts of their life that, their lives that other people at the table understand. And then they're not actually being included because they're not encouraged to be their authentic self, which means we're not getting out of that new cohort that we introduced into the table what we want. We're not getting their lived experience. We're not getting their different risk management mechanisms. We're not getting their different way of thinking. We're not getting the innovation that we're talking about. So really making sure we had all of these things. And for inclusion, we said it was kind of like having interpretation. So we might have some participants at the boardroom speaking a different language. So they might be speaking very loudly into the microphone, but we don't understand anything they're saying. So we need to make sure that we're able to understand everyone. So hopefully that makes that terminology clear. Now, just to remind everyone, we're also focusing on impact last time. And we focused on two key areas, preparation, where we set the groundwork for understanding key terminology, the business case and the human rights case, and we looked at how the world is doing so far in terms of gender equality in corporate leadership. So as a reminder, we learned that improving gender equality provides many benefits to society and the economy, much further beyond the boardroom or corporate environment. So, for example, we saw that studies have shown that gender equality can decrease violence in society, it can increase economic productivity, and it can also increase resilience against financial and environmental crises. Now, just as a reminder, we did not say that this was women doing all of this. It's rather the equality and making sure that we have that environment of diversity, equity, and inclusion where all aspects and thoughts are welcome. Now, let's also remember that increasing gender equality in corporate leadership was also found to create important benefits, such as increased profits, increased transparency, and improved environmental impact. So if you want to go deeper into that, you might want to check out the slides again from our last session. Now, we also learned about the UN Women's Empowerment Principles last time and shared with you how you can use these principles to get started on enhancing gender equality. And as a reminder, the seventh principle, measurement and reporting, was highlighted as one of the key principles, and we will be discussing more today on how to get started with public disclosures. But remember that there is more information to be found in the WEPs, and we can remind you of where to find all of that today. Now, finally, a brief reminder, since we actually didn't have time to cover this last slide on Wednesday. This slide came after that activity that Landon ran with the two fictitious companies, Owl Inc. and Peacock PLC. And as a reminder, we found that corporate culture played a really important role in making sure that we're setting ourselves up for success. However, good our intentions might be, and remember that Peacock PLC CEO had really great intentions, but they didn't take into consideration the corporate culture and the barriers that might be preventing equality. So we saw that they didn't actually achieve their objectives then, and in the end, they were wasting money or making it even worse. So a few actions to flag here. So first of all, providing gender sensitivity training for HR staff and managers can ensure a more fair recruitment process and enhance, for example, our diversity, that chair at the boardroom. We also could see that instigating policies aimed at providing equal opportunities for advancement that enhance equity for employees, that microphone, making sure everybody is feeling heard and able to be their authentic self. Also, in terms of audits and research, doing research to identify those barriers, such as external gender pay gap reports or enhancing inclusion. Can make sure, again, that we're all equally understood. And of course, this all does require effective communication from the top and really institutionalize and a desired corporate culture within. So the tone from the top is really essential. And we'll talk a lot more today, especially with Anna's intervention today, about how we can make sure that our strategy integrates that right from the top. Great. So that was a real quick overview of what we did yesterday or on Wednesday. Hopefully it refreshes everybody's minds, but you of course can go back to the recording and see that whenever you want. Now let's dive into the next unit, implement. So when looking at implementation of gender equality, we'll talk about products that support market action, and we will also look at mechanisms that add value and promote gender equality in markets in particular. And let's look at first at how financial products are being used to support gender equality and what opportunities lie within those financing mechanisms. Great. So to kick us off, let's look at the trends we're seeing in sustainable finance more broadly. So this chart, which you can find in the latest UNCTAD World Investment Report from 2023, shows that in 2022, the total number of sustainability themed funds worldwide has once again increased. Although the rate of growth, as you can see here, did slow from 2021. Let's keep in mind what was happening in the world at that time in 2022. But the total now stands at, as of this data, at 7,012 funds, up 18% from the year before. And these funds are found to be worth around 2.5 trillion USD. So we do see, as mentioned, 2022, a decrease in global net investment flows to sustainable funds, but it's important to note that this decline was a result of depressed asset values and investor withdrawals amid persistent market uncertainty. So that's something that we saw in all asset classes. As such, this growing trend of sustainable investing is still set to continue to increase. And we are also seeing significant growth in gender lens investing in particular. However, actually, the data on gender lens investing is much more difficult to measure, and we have less clear ideas of the exact magnitude of funds, and we'll discuss why this is throughout today's training. But while we're not showing you exactly that, we did put a little bit of information in the slide handout. So if you want to look at the numbers on gender lens investing from a few different sources, you can continue to read about that in the handout that we have on our webpage. But let's dive into what exactly is gender lens investing. So have a think about this yourself, and we want to hear from you. And you can just type that straight into the chat box this time. What do you think gender lens investing is? And I'll pause for a minute to let you think about that and type in the chat box. If you don't want it to be attributed to your name, if you maybe all your colleagues are here and you don't want them to see your answer, you can put it in the Q&A as an anonymous answer, but it is a safe space. Okay, so our first answer is promoting female founders. Great answer indeed. That certainly is a form of gender lens investing. Any other ideas? Right, so Amber says investing in companies that set out targets or commitment to gender equality in their workforce. Certainly, that's another way to apply gender lens to your investing techniques or strategies. We have another one from Malgosia who says investing in solutions promoting women insertion or entrepreneurial activities in emerging countries. Carlos says a special attention to companies with high transparency and equality. Yeah, certainly. And as we see with all ESG areas, sometimes it's more about transparency than actually performance. But I think we're starting to move towards performance more heavily. Hannah says seeing investments from men and women's side. So you might have to expand on that a little bit more in case I misunderstand you, but indeed it is looking at, which gender we're promoting, but of course we want to really understand, are we creating that, equal environment? Are we creating an environment that allows equality to flourish, whether that be within the organization or in society more broadly? Great. These are all wonderful answers. We also see assignment of key posts to female staff. A lot of investment products we see do look at the high level, kind of the board or the C-suite and how many women are there or how much equality we're seeing. But as we'll see, as we talk about indices and other products, that we go much beyond that often as well. Great. So those are all really good answers. Here's one definition, but you're all entirely correct. This is from the Global Impact Investing Network, or GIN. And they define gender lens investing as investment strategies applied to an allocation or to the entirety of an investment portfolio, which seek to examine gender dynamics to better inform investment decisions or to intentionally, measurably address gender disparities. So as you can see, there's kind of two sides to it. It might just be kind of segmenting out certain companies, as you say, that are doing fairly well in this particular aspect, or singling out those companies that are actively trying to change gender equality outputs and impacts in society. And sometimes we can see a combination of that as well. So, how are investors actually using the gender lens to make investment decisions? Is a big question. Well, the reason sometimes this can seem like a big question is because there's actually a ton of different strategies out there. So these are kind of the core strategies that we see. And we look specifically at what focus an investment strategy with a gender lens will take. So often we will see a combination of multiple or all of these strategies actually used in a varying degree. So we shouldn't see them kind of as siloed, but these are kind of the main focus of a lot of the strategies. The most common strategy that you might be familiar with is a focus on leadership, which a couple of you had mentioned. But other areas that we see investment strategies focusing on are employees and supply chains, products, services, and also the community. So at the firm level, fund managers can drive the adoption of gender lens or gender smart investing by starting with their own investment house. So, fund managers can strengthen the gender diversity of their own teams internally, for example, by the leadership setting clear targets or building a respectful workplace culture or making public commitments, as we talked about yesterday. And a good resource for this is with IFC, they've developed a framework that we link to in the slide. And it includes designing a gender smart investment strategy, engaging, training, and rewarding people within the firm, enhancing or adapting investment processes and systems, and identifying and collaborating with partners and external stakeholders at the firm level. But then, if we broaden out and look at the portfolio level, not just the actual person who's doing the investing, but what our portfolio looks like, fund managers are also adopting strategies both in origination and in portfolio management. So these strategies enable fund managers to allocate capital to companies that are committed to these kind of 5 key focus areas on your screen. And just to quickly run through those, they are in leadership, it's women's representation as founders, co-founders, or senior management. It could be in terms of employees looking at a gender diverse and equitable workforce. In the supply chain, making sure that we have a commitment to an inclusive value chain, and those same kind of commitments we see at the employee level, seeing if we have some policies in place with our supply chain. And remember, we also talked about that a lot with Anna on Wednesday through the WEPs. Then through products and services, offering and designing products or services that are considered to address distinct needs of underrepresented gender. In many cases, it's women. And ensuring in the community that their operations do not harm women in the community or actually improve the situation, which is hopefully where we get to. Great. So the good news is that as the benefits of gender diversity have become more widely recognized, investor demand for gender smart investment or gender lens investment has increased considerably. So this has led to the emergence of a variety of gender-focused financial products across classes. So to give a really brief overview of that investment universe, let's take a look here at how investments can be channeled towards gender equality and gender smart investments. So on the left-hand side of the slide, we can see that there are a few buckets of terms in the financial products that can be used to direct financial flows towards gender equality. These indices or these include equity-based financial products such as indices or just simple shares of companies. They can also include gender lens funds, and they can include debt or fixed income. And we're going to talk a little bit about all of these today. But what's important to also note on the right-hand side is that we can see that the investors accessing these financial products also vary. And we're seeing both retail and individual investors, as well as institutional investors, for example, making use of these financial vehicles. So this is important to note because different types of investors will have different needs and expectations, which leads to a diversity of products as well as different KPIs or objectives of each product in order to meet these different needs. So let's look in practice what this looks like in a few case studies. So this first example builds on what we discussed yesterday about how climate and gender can actually be co-benefits, or they can work together. Remember that we looked at a study that was done by IFC, and that's in our slides from last time too, that was looking at the connection between gender and climate. So this example comes from Gold Standard, which is an organization that was established in 2003 by the World Wildlife Federation, WWF, and some other international NGOs, in order to ensure that projects that reduce carbon emissions feature the highest level of environmental integrity and also contributed to sustainable development. So you might be familiar with Gold Standard if you're involved at all in carbon markets. So this case study looks at the Lango Safe Water Project in Uganda. And this project received the first ever Gold Standard Gender Responsive certification in 2020. The project actually rehabilitates boreholes to provide clean water in rural Uganda. And as of August 2023, credits are available to purchase on the Gold Standard marketplace, offering the purchasers of carbon credits the option to choose between carbon credits from a project which has been rigorously assessed to reduce gender inequality. So if we look at the climate and social impacts of this project, on the climate side, we're seeing that there are 50,000 tons of CO2 emissions reduction per year from this project. On the health aspect, we're also seeing that 40,000 individuals are now enjoying clean water access, reducing incidence of waterborne illness. We also found that each household gains almost 4 hours per week from reduced water collection needs, saving time for mostly women and young girls who are doing that collection. And that also showed that there was a reduced school absenteeism due to less exposure to waterborne disease and less time collecting water. But if we dive a little bit more into the gender equality impact, they also found that local water resource committees are approaching now parity, with 46% female to 54% male representation. And this was an objective put out by the project. They also have reported incidents of domestic violence related to water collection to have dropped to 0 compared to 35% prior to the start of the project. And 100% of those surveyed water users spend the time saved on water collection on domestic work, as well as income generating activities, and on social and leisure activities. So these are all things that from the get-go, the project kind of set out as KPIs, that even though it was an environmental project, they were really also including kind of gender responsive KPIs as well. Also to note, with Gold Standard, for certifying all their projects for carbon credits, they have actually 2 levels of gender analysis. One is mandatory and one is voluntary. So this one we've talked about was using the voluntary standard, but also there's a mandatory standard that everyone must comply with, kind of a minimum level of gender responsiveness in their projects in order to be able to list a Gold Standard certified carbon credit. So let's look at another example here. I'm just going to double check the chat. No, there's no concerns in the chat. So great. So then this next example is about another dual benefit bond. I realize that I'm actually a little bit behind on time already, so I'm just going to quickly run through this, but then really highly recommend you look at this one through the link on your own time. But this one, again, is looking at that kind of co-benefit that we can see between gender and climate. And it's from a Turkish company called Polat Energy, which received a loan for $44 million in 2019 to finance the construction of Turkey's largest wind farm. However, from the get-go, again, they put in certain criteria, and this was asked for by their guarantor for their loan, to set in not only kind of basic minimum requirements for human rights and gender equality, but how they were going to improve gender equality in society through this project. And they worked with that guarantee, or the bank that they got the loan from, in order to assess that and continually look at it. And that impacted the rate of their loan as well. So a really interesting example there as well. And because we're just a little, somehow I've been talking too much already, we're a bit backed on time, and I want to make sure our guest speakers have enough time. I'm going to pass this one through too, but highly recommend checking out this website. The IFC has a number of case studies that you can make use of here, and I'll just pop this into the chat so that everybody can have access to it. It's also, of course, in the slide deck. But there's a number of great resources that you can use here to look at case studies, and this one's another one on bonds. So with that, let's actually talk about bonds and focus in on gender equality bonds or gender lens bonds. So what exactly are gender bonds? So just to get started, I wanted to introduce broadly where the focus of these bonds sit. So as you can see here, gender-focused bonds are a subset of bonds within the green, social, and sustainability bond universe. Now, often we see these referred to as use of proceed bonds or sustainability-linked bonds, two different types of bonds that can be used for gender financing-related products. And gender bonds are not always seen as a category of themselves. So as we've seen in the case studies, often it's kind of a co-benefit or combined together with a green bond or another financial product. But the important thing is that there are distinct KPIs related to gender or linked to this project, and that can also impact the cost of capital or the lending agreement. And as we saw before with sustainable finance, let's look at the debt markets and see that there's actually been a quite significant growth also in the sustainable finance area in terms of bonds. So this data again was taken from the UNCTAD World Investment Report from 2023, and it shows that global issuance of sustainable bonds has surpassed 1 trillion in 2021. Again, same caveat here, we saw a slight decline in 2022, which was market-wide of all areas, even beyond sustainable finance. But we see the trend kind of continually growing here, and hopefully soon we'll have the next report out so that we can share the updated report there. There are a number of guidelines to help us determine what actually qualifies as a gender bond, and markets vary sometimes still on this, but importantly, I highlight these two guidelines here because whether we're the issuer of such a bond or an investor looking at investing in bonds that contribute to real gender equality impacts, it's important that we have trust and transparency in those products. So you can see two examples of these on the screen. We have the social bonds principles, which provide guidelines on issuing social bonds, and we have the Climate Bonds Initiative's methodology to determine whether to include a bond in its social and sustainability bond database. But again, what's really important about these guidelines here is that they help us to build trust in the market to ensure that social bonds are designed to achieve their intended positive outcomes, and to prevent any of that greenwashing or pinkwashing that we might see. Standardization can really help that. So making sure that you're aligning with kind of broader expectations for labeling these bonds or looking into the right kind of standardized processes. Now, with that, we're going to shift from debt markets to equity markets, and we're going to hear a little bit about indices. Now, we introduced a little bit of that last time with Equileap, but Nita, who is our senior index business developer at Euronext, works kind of directly in Euronext on this, and we want to hear her perspective of it. So over to you, Nita.
Thank you, Tiffany. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just sharing my slides. I hope that you can see my slides. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Tiffany, for the presentation. And first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about of gender equality topic, and notably about Euronext gender equality indices. So before diving into the core of the topic, a brief introduction of Euronext. So Euronext is a pan-European exchange and index provider. We are recognized for our blue chip indices such as CAC 40 for the French market, BEL for Belgium, or AX for Netherlands. On the ESG space, we have been pioneer and we have launched the first low carbon index in Europe in 2008, at the time when almost no one believed in ESG indices. Today, our index range is composed of several types of ESG indices. And for this, as you can see here, so we started our journey in 2008 when we launched the first ESG index. And since then, we have increased our focus in ESG solutions. So in 2018, we have launched the climate focus and environmental indices. In 2020, we have launched indices in line with EU climate benchmark, as you have heard, so PAB indices for Paris aligned benchmark indices, and as well CTB indices for climate transition benchmark indices. In 2021, we have launched the first version of the blue chip ESG indices. So starting with the CAC 40 ESG index, extending then with MIB ESG index and AX ESG index. The same year, we have also launched our first biodiversity indices. So here, once again, we were the first index provider to launch the very first biodiversity indices. In 2022, we have completed our range with more social focus solution, such as gender equality indices. So these would be the topic of our discussion. And in few seconds, I will talk about of these indices. And in 2023, we have launched a new innovative version of the biodiversity indices, where we take into account the double materiality assessment. So this year, among the different ESG indices that we have launched another social focused index, which is the employment, where we use NLP AI in the selection process. So now coming back to our gender equality topic. So end of 2022, we have launched our first gender equality indices, starting with Eurozone and French version. For these indices, we have partnered with Equalib, which is a leading gender equality data provider. Normally, as highlighted by Tiffany, you had a first presentation a few days ago, last Wednesday, on Equalib and their gender data metrics. So in gender equality indices, we use the gender equality score provided by Equalib. So this score is composed of different, as you can see here, of different metrics. So we look at a total of 48 different metrics that are divided into 21 criteria, regrouped into 4 categories. So the first category is around gender balance in leadership and workforce. Here, among the different criteria that we look at, we are looking at the composition of the board of directors, senior management, workforce, etc. And this first category counts for 40% of the total score. So I forgot to mention that the gender equality score that we use into the index methodology assesses a company's commitment to gender equality from its boardroom to its supply chain. And this score is also inspired from the UN Women Empowerment Principles. So in the second category that we look, which is equal compensation and work-life balance, here we will also look at different metrics that are living wage. If there's a living acceptable wage for companies, especially that are based in some countries where there is no policy around a minimum wage. If there is a gender pay, we also look at gender pay gap. If there is a parental leave for both parties, and also as well if there are flexible work options. And this category represents 30% of the total score. Now, the third category is around policies promoting gender equalities. So here again, we will look at different metrics and sub-metrics. Among them, we have if there are equal opportunities in training and career development, if there is a non-discrimination in recruitment, safety at work, if human rights are respected, diversity in the supply chain, employee protection, etc. And this one accounts for 20% of the total score. Finally, the fourth category is around commitment, transparency, and accountability. So here we will look at the commitment to women's empowerment, if there is an independent gender audit, etc. So this one represents 10% of the total score. So finally, there is a score which is given for each company, which ranges from 0 to 100, and 100 being the best score that a company can obtain. On top of the gender equality score that we use into the index methodology, we also have an alarm bell exclusion. So this one is about if within the 2 past years, a company has had a legal judgment or legal cases regarding gender discrimination practices or harassment, this company will fall into this list that we call alarm bell exclusion list, therefore will be excluded from the index composition. So now having a closer look on the gender equality indices that we have launched, I will focus here my presentation on the Eurozone version. So for this index, we use as a starting universe our mother index, which is the Euronext Eurozone 300 index, which is composed of 300 companies. So from the starting universe, we will exclude companies that are not in line with UNGC or international standards. We will also exclude companies that are involved in controversial weapons or in some controversial activities such as tobacco, coal mining, power generation, oil sands, shale oil, or gas. After all those exclusions, we will also have an exclusion on the social pillar. So we will exclude companies that are that have some controversies related to the social pillar or gender topic. Here it's linked to the alarm bell exclusion list that I mentioned earlier. On top of that, we also have some liquidity filters to ensure that the index is replicable, because in the end, also the goal of this index is also to make the investment funds use the index. Therefore, we need to assure the replicability. And finally, for the selection process, we will only select the 100 companies that have the highest gender equality score after all this exclusion policy. So in terms of review, this index is reviewed annually with a quarterly annually regarding the alarm bell exclusion list. Maybe some key takeaways. So as I highlighted before, we have 2 indices today live in the range, so a Eurozone version and also a French version. Here, the methodology remain the same, except the starting universe. The index methodology has a best-in-universe approach, meaning that we select companies that have a highest gender equality score, regardless of its sector. So therefore, we can have a sector bias. But once again, the indices that we have launched are flagship. So at request, we can launch indices that have some optimization at the sector level. The index methodology is also in line with SFDR Article 8 requirements, and it's also in line with SDG 5, which is the gender equality. I don't know if there are any questions, but for those who are interested in hearing more about our gender equality indices or discovering the methodology or having a look on the composition, the rulebook and the composition are available in our rulebook. And I'm happy to answer to all your questions.
Thanks so much, Nita. So have you, I might take advantage and ask a question myself, but have you seen kind of an increased demand for including gender equality data and maybe a more breadth of data, or have you seen the trends happening in that aspect?
Yeah, sure. So we see we have some requests. The thing is, a lot, to be transparent, a lot of people are interested in gender equality data because this is also pushed by some regulations such as SFDR that request into the PAI metrics that each company disclose gender equality data. But we see some interest, but in terms of product, we don't see that much. There are some products that exist in Europe, but we don't see that much products coming on this area. But we see some interest here.
That's very interesting. It's what we found in research too, that actually there's less interest in a full gender equality product and more in actually tacking on gender equality into all the other areas, especially bonds. We found that, especially when we look at institutional investors, they're only willing to invest, for example, in a green bond if there's been gender considerations actually included. So a different way of thinking of it for sure. And I guess a bit more holistically. In terms of data collection, that it's a little bit in everything rather than one category just on its own.
Exactly. I think that also today with the EU taxonomy, for example, some environmental topics are pushed. There is there are some works around this S pillar. So here again, I guess that some topics would be put at the moment, and maybe at the moment we will see more requests from clients on that kind of solutions.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Nita, for being with us. I'll just remind everyone that you can ask questions at any point. So if you do have a question for Nita, she's going to be with us for a little bit longer. And if she does have to leave before you ask your question, we'll make sure we get that question to her so she can answer you. Thanks for being with us today, and thanks for that great presentation. Everyone can find it on the website, on the SSE website. So if you'd like to take a deeper look at all of that information, you can do so. And with that, we're going to pass on to our next section, and Landon's going to take us through that. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Landon.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiffany, and thanks so much, Nita. That was really interesting insight as to how this works in practice with a product. Now, let's quickly finish this unit with the last section, and we'll talk a bit about how we can see gender equality themed products being promoted in the market a bit more generally. At the SSE, we did an assessment of how exchanges are working with their markets to enhance gender equality as part of our guidance for exchanges on this topic. And we found that there's two main ways that markets are promoting gender equality. That is through the promotion of participation and the promotion of impact. Let's go through both of them briefly. So first, with promoting participation, first, what do we actually mean by this in promoting participation in markets? Well, on both the supply side and the buy side, we're seeing the application of a gender lens in global markets to access unserved segments of the market. Now, on the sell side, we see markets promoting and supporting women-led businesses or female entrepreneurs. For example, Sourcing to Equal is an IFC-led initiative in partnership with the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative and Norway, and this aims to connect 5,000 women entrepreneurs to new markets via corporate procurement. On the buy side, we can see the investment in and support of women traders. This relates back to when we discussed earlier, the different gender lens investment strategies as being both not just at portfolio level, but also within the investment firm itself. This is because it has been well documented that all male investment teams indeed invest in fewer women-led businesses. One example of this type of promotion is an annual women-focused investment summit run by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, or JSE, called the JSE She Invest Summit. In addition to providing this network opportunity, the event covers a number of topics, including basic finance, investment literacy, as well as showcasing different ways in which women can invest in the market. Now, on the other side, with promoting impact, So in addition to promoting the gender equal participation in markets, we also saw in the study I mentioned that exchanges and markets promote financial products and companies based on their impact or their ability to actually improve gender equality, either within an organization or in society more broadly. So here we're seeing markets raise awareness of financial products and promote listed products through awards or incentives with the objective of shining a spotlight on those that are having a positive impact. We also see markets creating segments or indices that aim to make it easier to find and invest in these high impact stocks or financial products. Now, oh, there we go. Now, in terms of variations between indices, we've heard a lot about the Euronext indices already, but the index can vary from one to another. As you can see here, and as we heard from Euronext already, in order to truly capture the holistic picture, which we knew from our session last week, which is important, we also need to look at this topic from many different perspectives. So for example, if these indices were only collecting data on women on boards, this would, of course, only let us know one aspect of gender equality within a company. In some instances, this is what we want to know, but if we're investing with the objective of either directing capital towards companies that enhance gender equality related goals in society and their companies, or because we understand the value of enhanced gender equality, like we discussed last Wednesday. And in that case, we want a much more breadth of data, not just the women on corporate boards. However, what you will notice is that the categories can be quite similar. So you can use these categories to make sure that you're collecting a broad enough data as well. So as we learned last time, sometimes we can think we're solving a problem or improving gender equality, but we actually can make a problem worse. And the best way to prevent that is to thoroughly understand what's happening in your organization, going back to that culture idea that we talked about last Wednesday and Tiffany went over again today. So with that, let's do another quiz to test all of your understanding of today's topics. So the poll on the screen gives you a few options. Let us know which you think are reasons that investors are investing more and more funds in gender lens investments. So I'll give you a few seconds to select an answer.
Landon, can you see people's answers or not?
Yeah, just looking for that. I think you're
Yeah,
right that
I think there's
sometimes
something
Zoom
happening with Zoom today
changes day
because
to day.
I can only see it on one of my computers. So I'll let you know when we have a good portion. Currently, we have a third of people participating. So let's give them a few more seconds.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're nearly at 50%. So maybe 5 more seconds for everybody to fill that in. Great. Okay, now you should be able to see the results, Landon.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I can. Thank you. Okay, so in this case, this is great. So all except for the fourth answer are correct here. So see, there's only one or two that went for that fourth answer. So while gender-based investing can often be seen as a zero-sum game, preventing men from moving forward so that women can instead, gender lens investing is not meant for this. And if this is the outcome, then it's actually being done wrong. So well done to everyone. Really good results there, which is really positive to see. Now, with that, we're going to head to a quick break. We're roughly halfway through. And before we go, oh, 1 second. Sorry, I thought we had a question in the Menti. Okay. I don't think we do right
No
now.
Menti, but I think
Okay.
I just realized I forgot to share the screen with sound, so nobody's going to get their nice music. So let me reshare.
Okay.
Oh, it won't let me. Sorry. Zoom does this sometimes to me. It's one of those days. So you're all going to have to imagine the nice, quiet music in the background. But when
Okay.
oh,
All right.
the video is not working at all. We'll time it. We'll tell you when to come back in 5 minutes, but it's in my time in Geneva, it's 3:03. So at 3:08, If everyone comes back, we'll get started again. Thanks, everyone. Okay, this is where the timer would go ding, 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 and let everyone know that the break is over. But unfortunately, it's not letting me share that today. But I do actually quickly want to address a question that I have in the Q&A. It's from Amory, not Barbara. But there were a couple of questions here. It was very interesting that they had noticed that, you know, in financial products, we're seeing a big gap between the US and Europe. And they were wondering if that was the same in our market analysis. And actually, it's not. We actually see that the USA does very well in our market analysis and is kind of very closely behind many European countries, ahead of some of them. And if we're looking at CEOs in particular, in some instances, the US is even doing better. But then they further asked, how do we manage this gap when talking to stakeholders? I think it depends on the stakeholder for sure. So I'll just answer that question live. But obviously, when we're measuring different areas, financial products generally come out of demand. So it will depend where investors are required to consider these aspects, or where they, you know, put in a mandate in their own organization where they see the value and they're able to understand and correlate the value in having gender equality and other gender-related KPIs within their investment decisions. So it might be rather the difference in products would probably come back to the hesitation in North America with greenwashing and pinkwashing and whitewashing and legal aspects related to fiduciary duty, and where they're actually held to, you know, certain standards where they have to prove kind of their investment strategy, whereas we don't have that same issue in Europe. So that might kind of lead to a difference in products. That's not to say that we're not having the same kind of co-benefits introduced into, for example, bond products or specialized products. And if we looked at, obviously, then impact investors, we would see a very different picture too. So hopefully that kind of adds a little bit more of a perspective there. But it's something that I think would require a lot more investigation for sure. Oh, now the video's playing. Well, break's over. Sorry, everyone. Let's dive back in. And we're going to go into communication as our next topic here. And so to discuss communication, we're going to look at two aspects. We're going to look at internal stakeholders and communication internally within an organization, and we're also going to look at external stakeholders where we're reporting this information. And to start with, we're going to look at how you can manage effective internal communication. And while there are many methods used to enhance transparency within your organization, and I think especially on a topic like this, it's important to really enhance that internally, because those are often the stakeholders you're looking to work with and enhance their working environment, the working culture. And as someone mentioned before about terms, and categories, we want to make sure that what we're doing in the strategy level and implementation level actually is something that resonates with our own staff. So Anna is going to talk to us about how we can use then a gender equality action plan as a tool for communicating with internal stakeholders. Thanks so much, Anna, for joining us again today. As a reminder to everyone, Anna leads up the Women's Empowerment Principal Secretariat at UN Women. And I'll pass over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. So yes, I'm going to address the internal communication from a slightly different perspective. And that's how communicate by creating a gender action plan. So a gender action plan is the most effective when it is being informed by the views of all company stakeholders. So both from external and internal stakeholders. But let's stick to the internal communication now. A gender action plan is a roadmap for gender equality and women's empowerment. It really helps the company to embed gender equality into the company's business model, strategy, systems, and governance. So it's a little bit formalizing the activities that are being done. And also to kind of bring about that buy-in from all the stakeholders within the organization to understand where they are coming from. And we heard Tiffany talking about that and others talking about that, the importance of that diversity of views and opinions. And it is a gender action plan is a compilation of goals and indicators and targets. So why should your organization have a gender action plan? So it has different purposes. It helps to correct past and present forms of inequality and to prevent any future recurrence. I was actually thinking about that earlier in the poll. One factor is also to take gender equality into consideration is risks with today for investors of investing in companies that have large forms of discrimination and gender inequality. But it's also to ensure that all the strategies, policies, and programs, activities are gender responsive. So it is an opportunity to take a whole of organization approach to embed gender equality here and to deepen the understanding of gender equality among all stakeholders. So it's both kind of an opportunity for capacity building, awareness raising, but also the organizations today have very, very strong stakeholders that have an opinion, and you want to be sure that you're taking those opinions into account, particularly as you go external and announce your gender action plan. You want to make sure that there is no backlash or anything to it, that it is a solid gender action plan that you have prepared. And that also comes from internal stakeholders. And it's also a tool to track progress in real time to assess where your organizations stand on gender equality. So what are then the steps? They're very similar steps to other form of gender action plans. It starts by establishing the goals, and you can be guided by the 7 principles that we went over last time to meet in the first part of this training session, to meet the vision of the company. And let's say in this example that your goal is to improve the gender responsiveness in your supply chain. I'm just picking up an example here for the purpose of this creation of this part of the gender action plan. And then you have to create measures and activities. So what will be implemented to reach this goal? So what are those type of activities that you need to have an improved gender responsiveness in the supply chain? You might need to have awareness raising of suppliers. You might have communication to suppliers on what it means that you are now focusing on this as a major goal. Setting the baseline, where are you on the journey? You might have to also in that baseline understand where are you in your collection of suppliers. Do you know who they are? Do you know if they're women-owned, men-owned? Do you know that where they stand on gender equality? So that baseline is very important for you to be able to then measure the progress on your gender responsiveness in the supply chain. And targets and timeline is also very important, and you probably are well familiar with the SMART indicators and targets that needs to be specific, that need to be time-bound, achievable, measurable, and time-bound. So the timeline is also very important in the communication and the expectations from within the organization on when this will be achieved. And that also fosters the accountability to the process and making sure that it's moving along and making improvements. And also very important in that accountability is to have an owner of this process, somebody that could be the chief procurement officer, that is the ultimate owner, that then has the support of somebody in the purchasing department, for example, to be accountable for monitoring and also communicating this progress. Because once you have engaged all the stakeholders in this effort to create a gender action plan, they also expect to see what's coming out of it. So it is, just gave an example now on gender responsiveness in the supply chain, but of course it captures all of the 7 principles or some of them wherever you are on the journey. And just a heads up here that we've seen that those that are trying to cover too much might not actually achieve, but to take a solid step in the right direction, focusing in on a few things that you know that you can achieve under, let's say, 2 or 3 years is better than trying to capture everything at once. So I talked a little bit about this already, the SMART indicators and things to consider. But it is helping, the Gender Action Plan is helping your company to set the direction with this Gender Action Plan, helps you with execution, and also to be able to see the results as you will be measuring the implementation of the action plan. And it's important, of course, that your action plan is supported by practical implementation guidelines, and that you communicate regularly to all employees and stakeholders to ensure that they are aware of the action plan, your commitment to gender equality, and all of the activities, that it doesn't become just one department, but it is, as I mentioned earlier, a whole of organization and company approach and effort and priorities, that it's the responsibility of all employees, no matter in what department they are. And this is also how you will be able to engage everyone and also attract, depending on where you are, but attract investors that are looking for these type of organizations to invest in, business partners, and talent are more interested in this type of companies. And the communication then is key to share the progress on the implementation in your annual sustainability, ESG, or whatever reports you have. And also to have a continuous journey with internal, external stakeholders in the implementation of the Gender Action Plan.
Great. Thanks so much, Anna.
Yeah, I will leave it
Right.
at that. And I hope that everyone who don't have a gender action plan will now set out to do one. And we are here as UN Women to support everyone. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anna. And we also dropped in the chat the link to the WEPS gap analysis tool and the WEPS learning website. So if there's anything else you want to share, go ahead and drop that in the chat, and hopefully everyone makes use of those great tools that have already been developed.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Anna. And I think that made a really good connection too, of seeing kind of, it's almost a cyclical process. The internal communications are not in any way separate from the external communications, and vice versa. So let's look at now how that makes it into our public disclosures. And to kick that off, I'm just going to do a poll. Give me 2 seconds here to launch it. Okay, there we go. So this poll is just asking you, what are your current practices? Does your company disclose gender-related information through one or maybe more of these mechanisms? So maybe through CSR, ESG, or sustainability reports, maybe in your annual financial report, or maybe in a gender pay gap report. It could be all of them, none of them, one or two of them, or maybe you're not sure. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to fill that in. No wrong answer here. Great, thanks for the quick participation. We have 45% of you already filling it in, so I'll give maybe 5 more seconds for a few more. Okay, let's share those results then. So it looks like kind of the main area of disclosure is in a CSR, ESG, or sustainability report, but actually not that far behind is the annual financial report. This might link to a lot of the requirements that companies in Europe do have. Some of you, only 2 actually, that filled in the survey are aware of a gender pay gap report that your organization is using. If you are interested in learning more about gender pay gap reports and that data, you might also want to look at some of our past workshops where we often have a guest speaker from Equileap, or sorry, Equileap we had already, from a gender pay gap company, Brightmine. that works particularly on this topic. And that's in the second session, we normally have that. And so a number of you are also not sure, which is completely fine, but maybe something you might want to look into in your organization to see what is being shared publicly, especially if you're starting to develop that action plan, and knowing how you're communicating this information with stakeholders is quite important. Great. So let's look a little bit into what disclosure really is. And what I wanted to start with here is a discussion on who you communicate with will automatically define where you in your reporting and what standards you're likely use to do that reporting. So if you're reporting information to investors, and maybe that's because you're required to, the primary location for gender-related disclosures can be in your annual report. And the International Sustainability Standards Board, developed by the IFRS, has consolidated the major investor-oriented sustainability disclosure standards. And for reporting to other stakeholders, in addition to investors, you might also then use the GRI standards, which are widely used by organizations globally. But then together, holistically, these create kind of a full package of disclosure to a wide range of stakeholders. So in terms of the content for each type of audience, for investors, you might focus your disclosure on financially material risks and opportunities related to gender equality, as well as other information that can help investors in their investment decisions and engagement with the company. And as I said, this will often go into your annual report. Now, with ESRS, we're seeing a need for double materiality as well. So then that's looking also at what companies might have put in their sustainability report, but is requiring investors to also consider the impact of what they're investing in. So more and more we're seeing that information from the sustainability report have a very much kind of stronger support of our financial statements. And so it could be separate or it could be together, but keeping in mind that when we are looking at these different impacts, whether it be the impact within our organization or the impact on other stakeholders around us, we want to be clear who that audience is and what that impact we're looking at, so that we can be clear about our objectives and our KPIs and what is the trajectory that we're looking to move on. Now, this is more about reporting than about gender equality, but just to make sure that the audience understands that there's different types of reporting that we're seeing. Now, just to give a brief overview too of the different standards that we're seeing that can be used. Of course, there's the ISSB standards, which are only now, I think, a year and a half old. And these are used when reporting to investors. So if you are familiar with the recommendations, for example, of the TCFD or Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, these standards were developed very similar. They have the same kind of categories, but you might associate them mostly with climate then, because they kind of built off of the TCFD, which was climate focused. But I think it's also important to notice that in these categories, we do have kind of structures that we'll want to see, especially as outlined in S1, which is their broad sustainability guidance, where we need to understand all sustainability related risks and opportunities. And as Anna mentioned, maybe that poll we had, we need to, add in risks there. In our external reporting, a good portion of that is to look at kind of what risks and opportunities we're facing. And things such as reputational risks of maybe not considering gender aspects, or employee retention. These can have real financial impacts on an organization, and they should be something that companies are considering. And so they do fit within the framework of the ISSB standard S1. Now, also to highlight impact reporting, or what's the double materiality aspect often, is the GRI standards have a number of guidelines that you can also use here. So this is kind of what we often call as multi-stakeholder reporting, going beyond investors. And we did go through the GRI standards and identify those that most directly address gender equality, to help you know where to start to get guidance from these standards as well. And so the gender-related disclosures we see most heavily on discussing employees, so in 2-7, in government structures and composition in 2-9, in policy commitments in 2-23, and approaches to stakeholder engagement in 2-29. But also important to note that GRI is actually currently under a transition to new modular standards. But we can take some guidelines from their previous 2016 standards while this transition is under play. So if you look at the reporting requirements for both GRI 401 or 405, which is on diversity and equal opportunity, and on GRI 406, which is on non-discrimination, we see a few additional guidelines of disclosure on gender equality. And in both these two guidelines I just mentioned, it's recommended that the reporting organization shall report its management's approach for diversity and equal opportunity using GRI 103, which is management approach. Before we wrap up this session, just to note that because we actually found that there was no kind of one standard on disclosing gender equality, there's actually many different standards we can have. We actually launched a working group on this, and we're putting out a report together with IFC and UN Women in October, and we're working on already a follow-up report to that, where we brought together all these stakeholders and we said, what do we do about this? There's no clear standard that companies can move towards or follow if they want to publicly disclose this information. And we had a really interesting conversation with a number of these stakeholders where specifically at the standards level, the response was, we don't see it as a separate topic. We see it as underpinning all topics, which I think is why we're also seeing that in the product side, is that we're not seeing as many, specific gender equality products, but we're actually seeing gender equality being integrated into a number of other types of financial products. Now, I think that's got its positives and its negatives, but one of the negatives is it does make it harder sometimes for companies to navigate this field and to make sure that they're disclosing the information that's appropriate to disclose to investors while having their internal data also being collected. So interested to hear your thoughts on that too. If you have any comments on that, please do share it with us. In the meantime, you can always join our newsletter. I'll share a link in the chat if you want to hear about future publications we do about this, and we'll continue working on that. And we're working with UN Women and IFC to provide some policy guidance so that we can move towards at least having kind of one standardized set of guidelines on how to report on gender equality. We did have a few examples here. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to let you review these on your own time. Sorry, Landon, to skip your section there. But we have with us an expert on communications already. So I think we should move to her. Maybe I'll just quickly cover this slide before we move on to our guest speaker. So just to keep in mind that in addition to using the disclosure standards that we were talking about today, there's a number of additional kind of requirements that you might have to consider when disclosing publicly to markets. So we just note on this slide some things to make sure you're thinking about, including using guiding principles such as the UN Charter of Human Rights, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Women Empowerment Principles, like we've discussed already, and using those to consider what you might disclose publicly. Of course, you need to consider your legal requirements, which are fairly advanced in your region. But beyond that, you might want to also consider disclosure standards that we've talked about and rankings and benchmarks, such as looking at the World Benchmarking Alliance. And the methodologies for different indices, for example, can also give you a guideline of the breadth of areas that we want to be able to consider to give the full picture. Now, with that, I'm going to come over to Judith Stein, who, as a reminder, is Investor Relations Manager, to really add some color to what we've been talking about today. Judith, I think you have a good 15 minutes if you need the 15 minutes, so I'll pass over to you.
Great, thank you so much. It's such an honor to talk in this workshop. I've learned so much from your interventions, so thank you so much for facilitating this workshop to everyone who was involved from Euronext and as well from the UN side. as you mentioned, I would like to deep dive a little bit into communication, especially to investors, but also broader corporate communication on gender equality. And for that, I hope that my slides move. So first of all, I'm gonna do a very quick reminder of why investors should care about what companies say about gender equality, and also why companies should care about communicating about it to investors. And then we'll have a quick look based on ESG data from Euronext on what companies are already reporting today and the progress we're seeing. And then thirdly, I want to give some best practices on how to effectively communicate with the market on gender equality. Sorry, I have some problems moving my slides. So yeah, so first of all, why gender equality should matter to investors. Of course, the obvious reason would be human rights, the positive impact on climate change, etc. But we all know that investors are kind of like a particular population, and what speaks most to them are numbers. So I think the best way to convince investors to care about gender equality metrics, I mean, not all of them, but many of them, would be to point out the positive impact gender equality and ethnic diversity has on average performance of companies. We've seen numerous studies during the last years that point out that gender equality has a positive impact, gender equality in boards and overall on companies has a positive impact on financial performance. Recently in 2023, McKinsey, for example, has launched a big study around, I think they looked at more than 1,000 companies across the globe, and again found a correlation between better gender equality metrics and better overall financial KPIs, and not only financial. Of course, they know that correlation is not the same as causality, but this correlation between gender equality and between company performance has been proven over and over again over the last years. So it's not only financial performance.
Sorry to interrupt. We've had a few comments that no one can see the slide. They're still on the first slide.
Oh, okay. Can you see it?
So
Sorry, can you see it now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and I will move it like this.
Great. And just so everyone knows, I'll share the link to the slides in the chat too, so that everybody has them, so that they're not worried about what they missed. Thanks, Judith. Sorry about that.
Okay, no, thanks for pointing that out, because I saw them moving. So here's a chart as well, an analysis from Equity actually that shows once again how companies with above average female board representation outperform the market in terms of profitability, equity growth, and return on equity, which is very important for investors. And also reversely, we can see throughout these studies that companies that are below average in terms of board representation, they underperform the market on these metrics. So this is a very important study to look at. And again, what's very interesting when you look at the study from McKinsey, which is also publicly available, is that it also depends how the company embraces gender equality. So it's not enough to just include some numbers, but it's more about how the company then embraces the diversity they created in order to really have this positive impact that can be created from more diversity on innovation, on performance, on risk management, employee turnover. So we have a number of positive KPIs that should convince investors to actually look at companies' disclosure on gender equality metrics. Another very interesting study I would like to point out to you is one of UNEP Finance and United Nations Global Compact. And this one really looks more at the added value of engaging with investors on sustainability more globally, but we saw that gender equality is part of sustainability for every company. So they look more at the value that it can create for the companies themselves. And they identified in interviews with 36 companies, 3 kind of value creation dynamics. One of them is the communicative value, because engaging with investors, of course, helps to clarify the expectations of investors. It helps to give the context about data that have maybe been released and not correctly understood. And it very importantly for me also, it creates a learning opportunity for companies, meaning that it helps you to identify what the market actually expects from you in terms of gender equality. It helps you to gather feedback on initiatives you would like to launch and to really test kind of your own ESG engagement. And then thirdly, it's also it can also have a political benefit for the company itself. As an investor relations officer, you're kind of building the bridge between the market and the decision makers. So pointing out the market's demand in terms of gender equality can help to put this subject on the agenda, to generate funding for certain initiatives, and the other way around, generate an interest from investors on the on the initiatives that you already have. This brings me to the second part of where we are today in terms of gender equality reporting. And for this, I would like to have a quick look at the data that we can see from My ESG Profile. As you have heard before, My ESG Profile has been launched by our listing department last year. And there, basically, companies are able to publish their non-financial KPIs alongside financial KPIs. And this kind of also fills the gap with the global standards that we might not have at this point, because all the companies publish the data in the same format. So for investors, it's very useful because it allows them to really compare the data that are published in the same form. And what we can see from this data is that between 2020 and 2023, gender equality data disclosure on all of the gender equality KPIs that are available on My ESG Profile increased. So we can see, for example, that gender diversity on boards is disclosed by more than 90% of the companies today. And reversely, we can see that on gender pay gap, the disclosure is still very limited. And this might change with a regulation that is soon to come into place, and that we're going to look at it in a second. And within this data, we can also see a positive tendency in terms of how many women, the share of women on boards, for example, the share of women in overall workforce. And so the data we see is encouraging, but it also still shows that we still have a long way to go. If you look, for example, at the share of women in small cap boards. So one subject I want to touch on very quickly is another one that we see in the My ESG Profile data is that there are quite persisting differences still between different sectors. So we can see that in the financial sector, women represent almost 50% of the workforce, and in the energy sector, the share of women is below 25%. So companies in their communication often refer to the sector as a reason for why companies might not be at a certain level, and it's good to see this data in this context. But I would like to highlight as well that there are several companies in France and in Europe overall that launched a number of interesting initiatives, for example, partnerships with universities and with schools to kind of tackle this issue of underrepresentation of women in certain sectors. Euronext as well has launched several educational initiatives, such as the Blue Challenge that we do, financial literacy initiatives, as well mentorship programs with young graduates that can maybe encourage as well underrepresented genders to join sectors that they're not yet that familiar with. And now we come to the third section of my presentation, where I would like to very quickly, if it works, respond to a question on Menti. And for this, I would like to see if maybe Victoria has already put the question in the chat. And I would like you to answer to the question on what communication actually means for you. Do we have the question in the chat? Yes, perfect. So if it works for you, I would like you to respond on what communication means for you. We have the words flowing in, dialogue, trust, transparency, influence, feedback, open dialogue, share data, create a channel, These are very great responses. Get feedback. Awareness, relaying information, understanding, case studies. Transparency is a big one for sure. So that's very interesting. Thank you for responding. And we come to why that's important later on. And I think it already gets across part of the message they want to permit when talking about communication. So what is communication? I think for this, it's very interesting to have a quick look at how the model of communication evolved over time. So at the time of Aristotle, we saw that communication was pretty much seen as a one-sided approach. So somebody's speaking, and then the speech has an influence, and that's it. And this one-sided communication approach has recently evolved more towards a two-sided cyclical approach that takes into account that we're actually, as many of you pointed out, in a dialogue. So an understanding of communication that is not one-sided, but that also takes into account the response from the other side. And that is also seen in the definition of communication that we find in the dictionary, which is communication is a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behavior. So this element of exchange is really something that I would like you to take away from this workshop. Communication models evolve even further to be more seen like a process of transactions over time that is never ending, and where one response always influences the other response and the reaction that we will have in the future. And this takes me to the best practices that I would like to give to you for investor engagement. And the first one is really use the feedback function of communication. So investor meetings can really serve as a way to test what you want to do on ESG, to really understand how does the market understand what you're doing on ESG? What do they really expect from you, to really have like honest feedback on what you're planning to do, and also engage investors on the subjects that you would like to bring forward. An example is that this year we're doing the Investor Day at Euronext, and we did a perception study where beforehand, a few months before, we consulted investors' opinions on all different kinds of initiatives we do. And of course, we included questions on an ESG strategy and potential future ESG strategy in this questionnaire. Another one is to keep the dialogue going. So engagement on ESG shouldn't just happen once just before the annual meeting to pass some resolution, but it should be an ongoing process with ongoing feedback and dialogue with the market in order to really create this relationship and understanding on the subject. And so that the investors also really feel heard about their needs and perceptions of the subject. A third one is to link the right people, meaning it's a good idea to link ESG investors with your ESG experts internally to create this knowledge exchange that I was talking about before, and to really also enhance the credibility as a company on the subject. So communication on gender equality and ESG more largely can also represent a risk for companies. The risk of pink and gender washing that we've talked about before. And for this, I would just quickly like to show you this maturity model that you can use maybe as a tool to kind of understand where is the company today, and should we be very vocal about certain subjects, or should we maybe wait to first implement actions before we change our logo in Pride Month? This kind of example, this kind of model can help you to evaluate where you're standing on this. Other ways to avoid the gender washing trap is, as we saw earlier, implement a real action plan that is communicated and then can be followed by the market. Transparency is another word that we saw in the survey earlier. Transparency is very important. I mean, nobody expects you to be perfect yet, but the important thing is, I think, to show that you understood what is missing today and how you want to get there in the future. Then, of course, to have data that allow, especially to investors that are, again, quite numbers-driven, to allow them to follow the progress you're doing, but also to understand that people might be looking behind the pure numbers to understand how gender equality is really implemented within your company. And then, lastly, to fit form and content, meaning that a classic example we are often talking about are the mammals, the panels which are only with men. It's a bit of an evaluation situation, because if you have no male expert on a subject and you include a woman just to have her on stage, it might not be a good idea. But if you have female and male experts, I think it's always a good idea. And I can only say that when I'm assisting to a conference and I see only men on stage talking about a subject, I notice it. So I think it's something to take into account when you're planning your expert talks, etc. Another thing is maybe to use real images instead of stock images, because it can also once again show that the company is actually implementing things and might create more credibility towards the market. Then we come very quickly to the minimum reporting requirements, and those are taking much more time today than they used to, because with the entry into force, at least in Europe, of CSRD next year, those companies that have defined gender equality as a material topic will have to report on a number of new gender equality metrics, including the unadjusted gender pay gap. So we might see quite an increase next year in the ESG data that we've seen earlier on. So I'm very interested to follow how this will move forward. And we can also see the impact of regulation on the data that are already disclosed. As we saw that more than 90% of Euronext issuers are today disclosing data on gender equality in their boards, and this is mandatory as of 2026. So I have included also a slide on other reporting standards that touch gender equality. I would invite you, if you're interested in the subject, to look at this after my presentation, because I think I'm a bit over time already. But I'm happy to take any question that you might have. And also, I encourage you to look at the ESG data that we are publishing on my ESG profile for the different companies, and also the aggregated data that we've published as part of the Sustainability Week. And if you have more questions on the ESG-related reporting requirements, to reach out to our ESG advisory team as well, which are the real experts on this subject, and that can really help you out on that one. Thank you so much. Oops.
Thanks so much, Judith. Maybe before I let you go, can you share with us any key kind of obstacles that companies are dealing with in this communication hurdle?
I think one of the obstacles that can happen would be that not everyone is using, as you said, the same standards when evaluating the data. So it happens to us, for example, when we look at different analyst ratings on ESG, that we see that everyone relates to different type of data. So you really have to go in and every time and see, maybe not every company uses the same scope to evaluate something. So it takes a lot of actively looking after how you evaluate it, diving into the data and explaining. If you want investors to understand how you actually stand with regards to the subject. And another one is as well that sometimes investors look at some outdated ratings or data as well, and that influences directly their decision or their perception without really giving the chance to double check the data with you. So yeah, it's an ongoing work to update on the data that are out there.
And hopefully we're seeing it change quite quickly, no? Because the objective is to have some progress.
No, I think with CSRD, at least we'll have more rules as to what really should be disclosed, but then it would take some time for companies also to adapt to the rules that are coming up. So.
Thanks so much, Judith. That was a great presentation, and I couldn't agree more. I specifically like the manuals. I think we're trying hard to fight that, but I mean, as a woman myself, and Judith, I'm sure you've been through this too. Sometimes you get put on a panel and you're like, I'm not really sure why I'm here. And I think it was because of my gender, but I'll do it anyways. But I think that comes back to a lot of the reporting is we need to remember that we often use certain proxies to measure progress, and those proxies are not our objective, but rather we have objectives that we can't measure so easily, such as comfort level of both genders in sitting on a panel and having a discussion, and inclusion and welcomeness to that too. So Sometimes we just need more women at the top so that we can actually include more women on the panels in their own right. Thanks so much, Judith. Really appreciate that presentation. And as a reminder to everyone, it's on the website, so you can take a more fine-tuned look at that, especially those disclosure requirements for everyone in your market, which I think will be very helpful. Now, I am going to take everyone back to our mentee. So sorry, there was some confusion. We had two different mentees going on there. I'm going to come back to the SSE's mentee. Now, maybe Landon, you can share again our link to that, which is the one that you were using before. So maybe you had another browser open with this, and you can come back to it. You can also use that QR code in the bottom left-hand side, or go to www.mentee.com and type in the code 74443170. And just want to get a sense, these are the same questions we asked you at the beginning. So just want to see how comfortable you are now with these topics, more than anything, just to help us gauge how much we were able to enhance your comfort on these topics, and how much more work there is to do still. So the first few people seem to be, incredibly comfortable. That's really good. Obviously, we're all constantly learning on this topic. Even all of us facilitating this call, we're still continually learning, and we learn from you and your great questions as well. So it's a constant learning journey, but good to see that generally we've seen an enhancement of all of your comfort levels to being much more comfortable with that. Before we wrap up, I have one more question for you. So maybe I'll just give you 5 more seconds for those of you who want to fill in this question. Three, two, one. Okay, I'm going to switch it now to the last one. Whereas I just want you to take a moment to think about what your main takeaway from today's session is. We did discuss a number of topics together. We were looking at implementation and communication, but yesterday we were also looking at the kind of why and how, what frameworks you can use, why you want to work on this topic. So do take a moment to think about what your main takeaways are. You can share it with us in this mentee, but you will also be asked to share this, your main kind of learning from this, in our feedback survey, just to take a moment to make sure you are synthesizing what exactly you learned. Take a moment to start to think about what you want to do, what actions you want to take moving forward. And it looks like from those sharing it here, equality is really standing out there. So good. I think that the way we started was, what do we want, equity or equality? And equality is definitely the end objective. It includes diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's good to see that one's standing out so clearly. But we see here, what do we want, or what have we learned, is change, communication, transparency, framework. So that's all really good to see. Now, I'm just going to share with you before we wrap up today are a few resources that you can use moving forward. And I'm going to stop sharing this one here. So you should be able to see my slides. If you don't, go to the top of your Zoom and you might have 2 tabs. So go to the tab that says UNSSE screen and you'll see the slides again. And we're just going to wrap up with a few resources so that you can continue to learn as we are on this topic. So on our website, you can find all of the slide handouts, and the guest speaker handouts, and academic publications as well. And you can also find the recording of the training. So we already have part 1 on the website. In the next couple days, you'll get part 2 on the website as well. We also have in the slide deck additional training opportunities you might want to look at. So for each unit, you can find resources, reports, and some training that are relevant to that particular topic. So go through that and have a look at what might be relevant for your organization if you want to continue learning on this journey. I won't go through all of them, but there's just a few resources to get you started as you continue on this learning journey. Now, we did promise you a certificate. You all were really great. You participated in the full session. So we very much appreciate that. To get your certificate, we just asked you to fill in this quick feedback survey. So we've added that in the link. You will also get an automatic reply or automatic email from Zoom sent to all of you. And that will also have that feedback form. So if you happen to miss it out of this, this chat, you can access that from Zoom as well. I do think when you close the Zoom, it also opens up a link to the survey. So you should be able to do the survey immediately after as well. So if you have any trouble with that, let us know, but hopefully everyone can access that feedback survey. And please give us up to 5 working days to send you your certificate. Without a doubt, we always get a few emails after the session saying they didn't get their certificate. Give us about 5 days, usually comes before that, but if you don't get it in 5 days, then go ahead and email us. Do check your junk folder though. Sometimes it does end up in your junk folder, and it's coming from Simple Cert, which is a program that sends out certificates. If you have any questions or want to continue the conversation, here's our contact details. Finally, a big thank you. So first, I wanted to thank all of our official supporters. SSE official supporters provide financial contributions to the UN SSE so that we can continue to work on our mission and provide training workshops like this free of charge. Also, we would not have been able to come to you today without the support of Euronext. So thank you so much to our partners at Euronext, not only for hosting us, but also playing a very active role in the training and providing guest speakers as well. Also, this whole program has been made possible with the collaboration with IFC, UN Women, Columbia University, and the Luxembourg government. So thanks so much to all of our partners. That brings us to the very end. Thank you to all of you for joining us, for interacting with us, for listening to us, and for asking those great questions. It really made it lively. Wishing you a really great day and hope that you're able to get started now on your action plan, as Anna mentioned, and moving forward. I see also, thanks, Cleo. Thank you so much. If you wanted to say a quick goodbye, you're more than welcome to.
No, thank you. Thank you very much to all, and thank you to the great speakers. It was a great journey.
Thanks, Cleo. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Best of luck.